The casserole was warm in my hands, the towel underneath soft with age, edges worn from years of use. I stood in the hallway, narrow and dim, the kind of place that feels like it's holding its breath. The scent of baked rosemary curled into the linen, and I held the dish tighter, not for balance, but for something else, something steady. My eyes wandered. The photos on the wall were framed in golds and silvers, some crooked, all smiling. Birthday hats, wedding veils, laughter sealed in glass. But not one of me. I leaned in, looking closer, like I might have been caught in the background. I wasn't. The floor creaked under my slippers as I shifted my weight. Afternoon light filtered through the hallway window in slanted rays, catching the dust that floated, slow and aimless. It smelled faintly of lemon polish and time. I stood there, not quite ready to move forward, not quite ready to hear what was waiting on the other side of the door. Her voice reached me before anything else. June. Light, casual, too easy. She's not really family, she said, and she laughed. I froze. Not really family. Like I hadn't sat beside her during both births. Like I hadn't picked up her dry cleaning when she had the flu. Like I hadn't mended that curtain in her guest bathroom when the hem came loose, unasked. My knees didn't buckle, but the world tipped slightly. My fingers tightened around the dish like it was the only thing tethering me to this floor. There was a pause in the conversation inside, barely a beat, like someone had heard me through the wall. But then the voices rose again, like nothing had happened. The smell of her expensive perfume lingered in the air, mingling with furniture polish and something vaguely sweet. I didn't step back. I didn't cry. But something inside me shifted. Wasn't sure it would shift back. I looked back at the photos. Weddings, baby showers, barbecues. One of my son holding a sparkler on the 4th of July. Another of June in a white dress, glowing like a light bulb with all that attention. Frame after frame, moments carefully chosen, perfectly lit. But none of them included me. Not one. I reached out and touched a corner of a frame. The glass was cold, a bit dusty. It left a faint trace on my fingertip, like even the past didn't want to hold on to me anymore. I blinked slowly, half hoping I'd missed myself in the background. Maybe behind the cake, maybe behind the crowd. But no, it was like I'd never been there at all. The hallway grew quiet again, except for the laughter floating in from the other room, bright, too sharp now. Forks clinked against plates. Someone poured what sounded like wine. I didn't move. The dish had grown heavier in my hands, but not from its weight. From everything I'd poured into it that no one ever asked for, all the cards I'd mailed, all the gifts wrapped carefully in tissue, the voicemails I left, the years, the steady showing up, and all the thank yous I never heard. I breathed in. The air felt thinner somehow, like the walls were gently pressing in, waiting for me to choose. Silence again. I did, but not because I was weak. Sometimes silence is what you use to survive. For a moment, I almost turned. Almost let the dish fall, let the crash say everything I never dared to. But I didn't. I pulled my shoulders back, lifted my chin just enough, and stepped into the room. June looked up, surprised, but only for a second. My son gave me a polite smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. I walked past them both and placed the casserole gently on the counter. The dish clinked against the granite, soft but final. The smell of garlic rose up, comforting, familiar, and yet something about it made my stomach turn. "Smells good," someone said, probably out of obligation. I smiled, that stitched kind of smile, the kind made from holiday leftovers and unspoken grief. The dish was still warm, and so was I. Just not for them. The porch swing creaked under my weight, just like it always did. I remember how the wood would stick a little in the heat, and the Iron chains would moan the way old men do when they sit down too fast. Mama was snapping beans beside me, her hands moving fast, her apron smudged with something green. Daddy's laugh rolled out the kitchen window like music, big and warm, bouncing through the grass and landing right in my chest. The smell of peaches hung in the air, fresh ones, from the basket on the porch table, the kind that dripped down your chin before you could finish a sentence. My dress stuck to my knees, the cotton damp with sweat, and I could feel the sun curling my hair tighter than I ever could with rollers. "Pass me a few more, sugar," Mama said, not looking up from the bowl. I handed her some beans, careful, not to drop any. The cicadas buzzed so loud it almost sounded like applause. That swing was where I learned to listen, to sit still, to wait for the wind. I thought love was just that easy, just sitting beside someone who never asked you to leave. And I believed back then that family would always be that kind. That's soft. That's close. The kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people, but Charles made it feel like a dance floor. The linoleum squeaked under our feet as he spun me around, our hands sticky from dough and clumsy from laughing too hard. "Watch your step," I giggled, holding on to him like the world was twirling too. He winked. "This is the fancy part of town," he said, pointing to the cracked tile under the fridge. We both burst out laughing. The radio was humming some slow tune. Bobby Vinton, maybe. And the breeze from the open window moved the checkered curtains like they were clapping along. The smell of coffee still lingered in the air, mixing with lemon from the floor cleaner I hadn't quite rinsed right. I didn't mind. He grabbed my waist, still dusted with flour. "May I have this dance?" he said in that mock fancy voice he used whenever he was about to kiss me. "You may," I whispered. His fingers curled around mine so gently, I thought I'd never forget the shape they made. Burnt toast popped up behind us. The whole place smelled like second chances and small beginnings. That kitchen was ours. That life was ours. It didn't look like much, but we danced like we were rich. They handed him to me, wrapped in a blanket, warm and tiny, his cries shaking like they weren't sure yet. I pressed him to my chest, and he stopped. Just stopped. His fingers, little and pink, curled like commas into my skin. And just like that, every sentence of my life changed. It wasn't about me anymore. The room was still, the kind of quiet that feels holy. The walls were soft yellow. The lamp in the corner buzzed faintly. I could hear footsteps down the hall, but they felt far away. In that moment, it was just us, me and him. Charles leaned over, kissed my forehead. "He's perfect," he whispered. I nodded, tears slipping down without permission. The air smelled like cotton and warm milk. My heart hurt from how full it felt. I rocked him gently, like my arms already knew what to do. I looked at his face, still red and squished, and thought, so, this is love, not the wedding kind, not the dancing in the kitchen kind. The kind that stays, even when everything else fades. I'd never be alone again. Or so I thought. We planted the lemon tree on a Saturday morning. No real plan, just a seedling we found at the farmer's market and a spot in the yard where the sun hit longest. Charles dug the hole. I held the little tree like a secret, careful not to bruise its roots. "It'll grow," he said, wiping his brow. "Just give it time." And it did. So did we. I remember hanging laundry near it, sheets, that smelled like soap and sun. The clothesline swayed just enough to make me smile. Charles would play peekaboo with our son through the branches, his laughter carrying on the breeze. That laugh was louder than the birds some mornings. The citrus blossoms came first. Sweet, delicate, the kind of smell that lingered on your apron and made you close your eyes just to take it in. Then the fruit came, little yellows that surprised us with how bright they were. Every season, it changed. And so did we. But that tree stayed. Rooted, it bent, sure, lost some leaves. But it never stopped reaching for light. Neither did we. When he brought June home, I smiled before she even reached the door. I'd ironed the good tablecloth, the one with the embroidery his grandma made. I set out the best dishes and folded. The napkins just so. Cinnamon pie was cooling on the counter, her favorite, though she didn't know that yet. She walked in, her heels clicking softly, and I saw how nervous she was. I met her with a hug. "I'm so glad you're here," I said. And I meant it. She glanced around, taking in the smell of roasted chicken, the soft music playing from the radio in the corner. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble," she said. "I wanted to," I replied. "You're part of the family now." And I believed that, truly. If she loved my son, then loving her came easy. Natural, like breathing. I carved her name into my prayers that night, tucked it right between "keep him safe" and "let this love last." I pulled her chair out, for her at dinner, and I never once imagined she wouldn't stay seated beside us forever. Sunday mornings used to buzz with purpose. We'd fill the car with casseroles and cornbread, balancing pans on old towels so nothing spilled. The church basement smelled like love, warm, buttery, and a little chaotic. The folding chairs squeaked when we sat down. Babies giggled during the second hymn. Miss Eleanor would pass around her famous lemon bars like communion, and someone would always forget the serving spoon but bring a full heart. "Got enough plates?" Charles would ask, already grabbing extras for someone behind us. We passed stories around like side dishes, news of new babies, job changes, lost keys, and found kittens. Everyone knew everyone, and if they didn't, they introduced themselves. Over potato salad. That's what belonging felt like. Knowing someone would save you a seat, that you didn't have to earn your way in, that your name didn't need explanation. I used to think that kind of family was forever. Back then, I believed love was something you ladled out in big scoops, and it always came back around in someone else's casserole dish. I kept checking my phone that morning. Tapped the screen, stared at it, turned the volume up just to be sure. Nothing. Not a single ding. No group text, no cheerful "don't forget brunch." Not even a stray emoji from June. I told myself maybe they were just running late. Maybe the thread moved to another app. Maybe they forgot to include me by accident. The house was still. I could hear the faint chirp of birds outside and the hum of the refrigerator. The smell of leftover toast lingered, mixed with the lemony dish. Soap I'd used on the breakfast plates. I'd wiped the counters twice, maybe 3 times. There wasn't anything left to clean. I picked up my phone again. The screen lit up in my hand, just the time and the same blank notification bar. Cold light against my palm. I sat at the edge of the kitchen chair, heart oddly quiet. Not hurt. Not yet. Just waiting. Waiting for a ding that didn't come. The silence didn't scream. It hummed, low and steady, like a door quietly clicking shut behind you before you realize you were standing on the wrong side. I stood up slowly and folded the towel that was already folded. My fingers lingered on the corners, smoothing them. I kept thinking, maybe they'll text any second now. But the phone stayed quiet, and so did the part of me that was used to being remembered. As I reached their porch, I heard laughter inside. Real laughter. Loose and bubbling, the kind that fills a room without effort. Someone said something, and they all cracked up again. It floated through the door, light and free. I paused for half a second, just enough to feel it. Then I stepped in, the door clicked shut behind me, and like magic, the laughter stopped. Not gradually, all at once, like a record scratch in an old movie. Even the air felt different. Their heads turned. June looked over her shoulder and offered me a smile that came a second too late. "Oh, you're here," she said, rising from her chair like she wasn't just surprised, but almost caught. I held the casserole steady, warm against my hands, my mouth curled into a practiced smile, gentle, polite, not quite reaching my eyes. My son stood, half-heartedly, muttering, "Hey, Mom," before sitting again too quickly. The room smelled of coffee and syrup, sunlight slanting through the blinds across half-cleared plates. It all felt lived in, as if I'd arrived late to something that had already moved on without me. I walked toward the kitchen slowly, the weight of the dish growing heavier with each step. I placed it on the counter, careful not to let it clink too loud. No one said much. The silence settled in again, this time heavier than before. The casserole began to cool, and I tried to believe I hadn't noticed. June looked at me, napkin still folded neatly on her lap, and said it like she meant well. We already ate. Soft, almost kind. I nodded, smiling out of habit, though my face twitched. At the corners, on the counter beside her elbow, sat a full plate, untouched but used. A stack of clean ones leaned against the sink like the party had ended just minutes before. I stood there with the dish still in my hands, warmth seeping out the bottom and up into my arms like it was trying to comfort me. "I brought the spinach and cheddar one," I said, my voice too light. "The one James always liked." June glanced at it briefly. "That's sweet of you," she replied, turning back to the table. "We just weren't sure if you were coming." I blinked. "No one texted." "Oh." She waved it off. "Must have slipped my mind." I gently set the dish on the stove, adjusting it so it wouldn't scratch the burner. The smell of ham and hollandaise still lingered in the air, mingling with mine. Mine smelled fresh, warm, uninvited. "Well," I said softly, brushing non-existent crumbs off my skirt. "It's here if anyone wants some." My son didn't look up. Someone in the other room turned on the TV, volume low. I stood a little longer than I should have, like a song that kept playing after the last dance ended. He didn't say much. He never does when it's uncomfortable. He looked past me, like I was the guest of someone else's mother. His eyes flicked from the counter to his coffee mug to the wall behind me, but never once met mine. He wore a blue shirt. Not the same one, of course, but the color was so familiar, it hurt. It reminded me of the one he wore for his third-grade recital, the one I stayed up late steaming so he'd look sharp in front of his friends. He hated the collar then. Now it just made him look like someone else entirely. I took a step closer. Not enough to crowd him, just to see if he'd notice. "Did you try the casserole?" I asked, my voice thin. He cleared his throat. Not yet." Silence filled in around us. Glasses clinked in the sink behind him. Somewhere nearby, a banana sat overripe in the fruit bowl, its skin beginning to freckle. I opened my mouth to say something else, but the clock on the wall ticked too loud just then, and that felt louder than anything I could have said anyway. He turned away, reaching for a plate he didn't need. I stared at the back of his head and wondered, when did my own son forget how to look at me? There was a time when this kind of day would have happened at my house. When the smell of pie would have floated down the street and kids would have raced up the porch steps, tracking mud and joy in equal parts. I would have had the windows open and the radio humming, and the kitchen would have felt like the warmest place on earth. But today, I stood in June's kitchen. I could hear the kids outside, giggling in the backyard. The shadow of the tree out front danced lazily across the curtain. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and store-bought pastries. No, one needed me here. I used to hum while I stirred the gravy. I used to press linen napkins and light candles that had no scent but meant something anyway. I used to know where everything went, who liked what, when to call everyone to the table. Now I stood near the counter like a stranger, not quite sure where to set my hands. Someone asked from the other room, "Where should I put this dish?" And June answered, "Anywhere's fine," without even looking my way. That used to be my answer. The shift hadn't been sudden. It never is. It crept in slowly, like wallpaper peeling back one corner at a time. Small, quiet, unnoticed, until, suddenly, I was just a guest with a familiar name. The casserole sat where I left it, still warm, but barely. The towel I'd wrapped it in was folded neatly over my arm, though I didn't remember doing it. It was my recipe. One they used to call me for. One I used to make with pride, tweaking the seasoning just right depending on who was coming. Now it sat untouched. Not rejected outright, just forgotten. I looked at it for a while, like it might speak up in my defense. Like it might say, she tried. She still matters, but it didn't. I stood there with both hands full and nothing to hand them to. My mouth was dry, my eyes too wide. I wasn't angry, not really. Just lost in the way a person gets when the world keeps going without glancing back. The television murmured from another room. A spoon clinked lazily in a mug. I could have left it, walked out, and left the dish sitting there, still wrapped in hope. But I didn't. I couldn't quite. Let go, not of the food, not of the hope. Not yet. I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen, arms crossed, holding a dish towel I'd folded 3 times already, and still didn't know where to put. The counter gleamed, not because someone cleaned it, but because no one had touched it in days, maybe weeks. It smelled faintly of lemon, the kind I used when I wanted the house to feel welcoming. I used it yesterday, out of habit. I ran my hand along the edge of the counter. Cold, smooth, too smooth. Was I too much? Too eager? Did I smother them with kindness, or not give enough for them to come back? I never wanted to be the kind of mother, or grandmother, people had to tiptoe around, but I wonder now if I was the one who missed the steps. The fridge hummed behind me like it was trying to whisper something I couldn't quite catch. A kind of soft, lonely noise that never used to feel so loud. I looked at the polished table, no plates, no crumbs, not even a stray napkin. Just that heavy stillness, not the peaceful kind, the kind that makes you question every word you've said in the last decade. My hand tightened on the towel again. I smoothed it, folded it, refolded it. Like maybe this time it would fold into something that made sense. I don't need applause, I never have. But sometimes, I just want to be missed. Max used to follow me everywhere. I couldn't sit for 5 minutes without him curling up at my feet, resting his head across my slippers like they were his favorite place in the world. But lately, he drifts. This afternoon, I found him lying near the window, his nose pressed to the glass, watching the empty street like he was waiting for someone else. "Come here, old boy," I called softly. He didn't move, just sighed. A long, heavy one, like even his heart had aged. I sat in my chair anyway, the one with the floral cushion he used to claim before I got there. I reached out and touched his ear. He flinched in his sleep. That startled me. Max never flinched. I pulled my hand back slowly, rested it on my lap, and stared at the soft ticking of the mantel clock. The kind of silence that makes you listen too hard. Outside, a lawnmower buzzed down the block. Inside, nothing buzzed except the ache in my chest. I think he feels it too. That shift, that slow fading of presence. The way a house changes when the center of it starts to disappear. He used to need me. Or maybe he just wanted to be near me. That's not the same, but I miss both. The night Charles whispered to our son, "You'll always have your mama," something anchored deep inside me. It was late, and the nursery was warm. The cassette in the corner hummed a lullaby, soft, crackling at the edges like it was trying not to wake anyone. Our boy had just settled, cheeks still pink from crying, but breathing now like he trusted the world again. Charles leaned over the crib, rested a hand gently on the baby's chest and said it, not loud, not for me, but I heard it anyway. "You'll always have your mama." The way he said it, like a promise you'd carve into oak. I stood in the hallway, holding a burp cloth, not moving. The yellow nightlight cast Charles's shadow long across the wall, like something protective stretching over both of us. The warm night air floated in through the window screen, carrying the scent of cut grass and baby powder. I remember blinking slowly, not from tiredness, from stillness, from awe, that this little life was now part of mine, that I had someone who would always look for me in a room, even if he didn't know why. Now. Sometimes I sit in that same hallway. The crib is gone, Charles is gone, but I still hear that whisper. I hold it like a thread, even when everything else feels unraveled. I wish I could hear it just once more, to remind me I'm still here, still someone's mama. There was a time I could walk into a room and people would look up, light up even, glad. "You made it," they'd say. "Tell that story again, the one about the neighbor and the flaming casserole dish," and I'd tell it, every time. With new details and the same old laugh that made them lean in. Now I walk in, and conversations fold up like Sunday papers. People glance, then look away, polite smiles. That's it. Tonight, I stood at the edge of someone else's kitchen, holding a plate I didn't know where to set. Pot roast and wine filled the air. Laughter came from the living room, not meant for me. I hovered. Someone passed behind me without a word. I smiled anyway. My hands started to fidget, touching the hem of my cardigan, then the edge of the counter. I used to carry serving spoons and stories in these hands. Now they just search for something, anything, that says I belong here. I used to fill a room. Now I try not to take up too much space in one. I was 23 when I first stepped into Charles's mother's kitchen. It smelled like meatloaf and burnt coffee, and her voice carried through the house like she was used to being obeyed. She was assigning tasks when I arrived. "Eleanor, you handle the salad. Ruth, get the gravy stirred." Everyone nodded, moving. Like parts in a machine. I stood there in a floral dress and too tight shoes, waiting. She looked at me, smiled a tight, polite smile, then turned and handed the rolls to someone else. Not cruel, not rude, just like I wasn't part of the picture. Stood beside the counter, hands folded, watching the apron stay folded on the hook. Not offered, not mine. That night, I told myself something. I told myself, if I ever run a kitchen, no one will feel like this. No one will stand at the edge of the room wondering if they belong. And for years, I kept that promise. I handed out aprons, like invitations, made room, pulled people in. I never wanted silence at my table, but lately, I've seen myself doing it, not noticing who's near the doorway, not reaching out. And I wonder if, without meaning to, I've become her. Maybe we all circle back, in some way, to the thing we swore we'd never be. I hope not. But some nights I'm not sure. There's a quiet that isn't gentle. It doesn't calm or comfort me. It hovers. It peers over your shoulder and waits for you to break the silence with something that matters. This morning, I dusted shelves that didn't need dusting. I watered a plant that's already plastic. I lit a vanilla candle that no one would smell but me. I looked around and thought, is this what it means to be alone, or just unseen? The flowers on the table were wilting, petals curled in like they were tired of waiting for admiration. The radio played in the background. I turned the volume up, then down, then up again. Sometimes I talk about it, ask for things. Do they even notice? I wait for the commercials to answer. They never do. Outside, the wind chime tapped gently against the porch railing, barely moved, like even the breeze had lost interest. I don't mind silence when I choose it, but this kind of quiet, the kind that comes without knocking, then never leaves. It asks questions I don't have answers to, not anymore. I sat down on the old bench even though I knew it would be wet. The iron chilled through my dress and into my bones, but I didn't move. I didn't flinch. The cushions had been taken inside weeks ago, maybe months. I couldn't remember now. All I knew was that it was raining, and for once, the rain didn't feel like something to avoid. The garden around me was beginning to wilt. Blooms drooped like they were too tired to pretend anymore. The air smelled of wet soil and something softer, like regret, but quieter. I folded my hands in my lap and listened to the sound of the rain tapping on the leaves above me. It was steady, reliable, more comforting than silence. Sometimes sitting in the rain feels less lonely than sitting in a house where no one says your name anymore. I used to come out here with Charles. He'd say, "We'll wait for the sun," and I always believed him. But today, I didn't wait. I just sat, because sometimes you need the cold to remind you you're still here. There was a bouquet on the porch step, slumped to one side like it had given up. The plastic wrapping was slick with rain, and the tiny white sticker that once held a price was curling in on itself. No card, no note, just damp petals clinging to stems, dropped off in silence. I bent down to pick it up, not out of joy, not even expectation. Just a habit, just to keep my hands from trembling. The carnations were pale pink, the kind you buy when you don't know what someone likes. They smelled faintly of perfume, old and faded. I held them to my chest anyway, the water seeping into my blouse, and I closed my eyes. They were light, too light. But I held them tighter, pretending they weighed more than they did. Pretending someone had meant it. The wind caught the edge of the wrapper, made it rustle like paper being turned too late in a church bulletin. I looked up, then back at the bouquet. Love, when it's forced, smells like this, like rain and guilt and something. Picked up last minute, still, I brought them inside, just to feel the weight of something. I stayed longer than I should have. The sky folded in on itself, changing from silver to gray, then to that deep blue that doesn't feel like night. It feels like giving up. The porch light clicked on, not because someone turned it on for me, but because the timer said it should. I didn't look at it. I looked out at the driveway. No headlights, no car pulling in. Just the soft thud of rain pooling in the flower beds, and the wind tugging at the trees like it had something to say but didn't know how. I sat there, wrapped in my cardigan, soaked through. The cold didn't bite. It settled. Wrapped itself around me like an old friend who only shows up when no one else does. I counted breaths, then minutes, then none at all. Grief doesn't announce itself. It waits. And when the dark came to sit beside me, it didn't say a word, but it stayed. Grief doesn't knock. It doesn't show up with swollen eyes and trembling hands. It curls around you slowly, like moss growing on a forgotten fence post. Quiet, patient, persistent. I didn't notice it at first. I thought I was just tired, or busy, or old. Then one day, I looked in the mirror and couldn't remember the last time someone saw me, really saw me. I walked through the yard, the rain now just a mist. The moss was thick near the base of the fence, green and damp. It looked alive in a way I didn't feel. The air smelled of wet leaves and cedar, that sweet rotting scent that says the season is changing, even if no one tells you. I used to feel like part of things, part of the kitchen, part of the noise, part of the table. Now I feel placed, like a vase on a shelf. Nice, decorative, not needed. I leaned against the post, felt the cool moss against my palm. It didn't flinch. It didn't care. It just stayed. Sometimes that's all grief is, the thing that stays when everything else moves on. I thought about the drawer in my bedroom, the one that holds my will, folded neatly in a blue envelope, sealed tight. I wrote it years ago, when love still felt returned. Each page was careful, kind. Every sentence is a prayer. Make this easier for them. Let this be a blessing. But now, I wonder. I stood by the window, looking out at the dark yard. Rain streaked the glass, and the porch lamp glowed behind me, soft and useless. A bird feeder swayed in the wind, beads of water dripping from the chain like tears that couldn't commit. I wonder if kindness should always be rewarded, even when it's forgotten. I wonder if my love, quiet, consistent, unthanked, should still be passed down in fine china and well-folded linens. Maybe I should rewrite it, or maybe I should let it be. Let the silence speak for itself. There's a pain that comes from being invisible, but not the kind you feel in your chest. It's slower, softer, like air slowly letting itself out of a tire you didn't realize was losing pressure. You're still here, still breathing, still setting the table, folding the towels, checking the porch light, but you've stopped taking up space. I used to sing. I used to tell stories that made people pause and say, "Tell that again." I used to hear my name without having to say hello first. Now, I'm part of the background. A sound someone thinks they heard but can't quite place. I looked out into the garden. The shadows had lengthened, stretched long and still. The gutter dripped, steady and rhythmless. My sweater was damp against my back, the kind of cold you don't notice until you shiver. I wonder sometimes if they'll notice when I'm gone, or if they already think I am. There was a knock, soft, almost uncertain. Just one. Then two more, spaced out, like someone wasn't sure they should be there. I opened the door slowly. The porch light flickered behind me, casting a warm glow onto the drizzle outside. And there she was, Emily from 2 doors down, holding a paper plate wrapped in foil and 2 cookies already escaping the edge. "Mama made too many," she said, pushing the plate forward with both hands. Her raincoat was too big and smelled faintly of cinnamon and wet grass. I smiled. Well, lucky me. But it wasn't just the cookies, her eyes. They held something else. A question, maybe, or a kindness she didn't know how to word. Something I didn't know I needed to answer until I saw it. "Can I come in for a minute?" she asked. I stepped aside and let the warmth of the hallway fall across her shoulders. She swung her legs beneath the kitchen chair like she'd always belonged there. Her feet didn't quite touch the floor, and the hem of her jeans was damp from the rain. She reached for a cookie with both hands and said through a mouthful of crumbs, "You remind me of my grandma." I froze just a beat too long, then smiled too. The words wrapped around my chest like steam rising from the kettle. Gentle, warming places I hadn't felt in a while. I poured her tea into one of my mismatched mugs and pushed it gently across the table. "Well," I said, settling in, "I'll take that as a compliment." She grinned wide, brushing crumbs from her chin. The soft ticking of the wall clock filled the space between us, and for the first time in a long time, my kitchen didn't feel so quiet. She took a sip of tea and looked at me the way kids do when they've just built up the courage to ask something that matters. "Do you have any stories?" Her voice was soft, not shy, just hoping. I blinked. My mouth opened before my fear could catch up with it. "I might have a few," I said, my own voice sounding new in my ears. She leaned in closer, elbows on the table, eyes wide with waiting. And, just like that, something shifted, not loudly, not all at once. But something inside me cracked open, not from pain, but invitation. The dog let out a soft sigh from his corner. The candle flickered beside us in its jar. And outside, the rain had finally stopped. And inside, I felt like I had just begun. I hadn't opened that photo album in years. Not because I forgot it was there, but because I remembered too much. It lived under the hutch, tucked behind a stack of placemats I never used anymore. When I pulled it out, dust flew off the cover like it had been holding its breath. I sat down, on the couch, the spine heavy in my lap. My fingers paused on the cover. Then, gently, I opened it. The pages whispered as I turned them, soft crackles and the faint scent of old paper and cedar. And there we were, Charles, me, Our boy in his overalls, trying to ride a tricycle that clearly wasn't built for speed. A photo fluttered loose and fell to the floor. I picked it up. Charles was holding our son in one arm and a plate of barbecue. In the other, grinning like he'd just figured life out. I smiled. Not with my mouth, but somewhere deeper. I had lived. And I had proof. The words came out before I even knew I was going to say them. Let me tell you a story. Emily sat straighter, eyes shining under her bangs. She didn't say anything, just wait, and that waiting, that believing I still had something worth sharing. It undid me a little, my throat tightened, but I pushed through. This one's about a pie that almost burned the house down, I said, and a man who tried to pretend he could fix an oven with a hammer. She giggled. I smiled. I hadn't said those words. Let me tell you a story. In months, maybe longer, and somehow, speaking them lit something in me. Small, steady, bright, like lighting a match in a dark room, not to chase the shadows away, but just to see them clearly again. Outside, the first star blinked through a gap in the clouds. Inside, I kept talking. And for once, I didn't feel like I was talking to myself. The papers were stacked neatly on the oak desk, thick, cream-colored, sheets that felt heavier than they looked. The lawyer gestured politely, said nothing more than, "Here," and slid the pen toward me. I didn't offer explanations. He didn't ask. I picked up the pen and took a breath. The office air was still, faintly stale like it hadn't been stirred in a while. A strip of sunlight warmed the edge of the folder, and I stared at that little slice of brightness before I began. I signed the first page slowly, each letter shaped with care. Then the next, then the next. My initials curled in the margins like quiet declarations. It didn't feel like an ending, not quite. It felt like letting go, like pulling a thread from an old quilt, one I had stitched too tightly around people who had long since stopped reaching for the warmth. With each signature, I felt something loosen, not with pain, with peace. I opened the cabinet with both hands, slow and deliberate. The hinges creaked, and the faint scent of wood and thyme spilled out. The china was still there, tucked in tight behind the daily dishes no one used anymore. Ivory plates rimmed in silver, with the faintest trace of dust on the top one. No one had asked for them. Not for holidays, not for memories. I touched the rim of the teacup gently, then lifted it. No cracks. Still perfect. I packed it up anyway. I donated my pearls the week before to a scholarship fundraiser for girls I'll never meet, and today I folded my mother's quilt and slid it into a box marked Shelter Donations. I ran my fingers across the faded stitching once before closing the lid. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. Love that sits untouched too long begins to sour. It wants to be used, held, needed, and I had more to give, just not here. I roasted the chicken with rosemary the way Charles liked it. I peeled the potatoes by hand, mashed them with just enough cream to make them soft but not forgettable. I dusted the apple pie with sugar, watched the crust turn golden through the oven door. I ironed the napkins into soft triangles and lit the candles they'd given me one Christmas, still in their box after all these years. I placed them carefully between the plates. I didn't rush. I cooked like I used to on Thanksgiving. Only this time, it wasn't a celebration. It was a ceremony. The kitchen smelled like garlic and something warmer. The music playing was soft and slow, the kind you'd hum without realizing. I set the table in silence. This wasn't a meal. This was a chapter closing with a full plate and an empty chair. They arrived just past 6, punctual, cautious. June's heels clicked into the dining room like she was stepping into a gallery. She raised an eyebrow at the place settings, at the candles, at the pie still steaming on the counter. "This is nice," she said. Her tone didn't land where she wanted it to. My son offered a hesitant smile. "What's the occasion, Mom?" I took my seat slowly, placed my napkin in my lap, folded my hands. My chair creaked in the stillness. "This will be our last dinner together like this," I said. The words floated in the air, then dropped like a fork on tile. June let out a short laugh, quick and sharp. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer. Her. I looked at my son. He blinked, confused. His hand hovered above the bread basket, unsure. But I stayed still. Stillness has its own kind of voice, and tonight it spoke louder than either of them could. He didn't touch his food. Not at first. Then came the question. Soft, like he didn't want to know the answer. "Why are you doing this?" I looked at him, his face still so much like Charles's. It hurt a little, even now. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tremble. Because love should feel safe, I said, not stored away like something breakable. He blinked again. "I've spent too long keeping my worth in their attic," I added. Wrapped in tissue, pulled out for birthdays and boxed back up the day after. June shifted in her chair. The candlelight flickered against her glass. The clock ticked in the next room. My truth had waited long enough, and now it was right where it belonged, on the table. After they left, I stood near the hallway. The dishes were done. The room was dim, warm, with leftover candlelight. I walked to the wall of photos, the ones I'd hung, the ones I dusted. Faces smiled back at me. Birthdays, weddings, baby teeth, graduation caps, all perfect, none of mine. I rested my hand on one of the frames. It was cold. The glass was clean, but the memory behind it didn't hold me. My son had asked if I was angry. No, not angry, just awake. I whispered it more to the room than anyone else. Family isn't who's in the photo. I paused. It's who holds the frame when no one's watching. I didn't cry. Didn't need to. The quiet around me wasn't empty. Not anymore. It rang with something clear, like the last note of a song that finally ended the way it was meant to. It started with banana bread, just 2 loaves, one for me and one for whoever might need it most. The mixer hummed softly, and the smell of vanilla filled the kitchen like an old hymn I hadn't heard in years. Birds chirped outside the window, and sunlight fell across the tile, warm and wide like an open hand. I reached into the drawer for my apron, the one Charles gave me on our 30th anniversary. Faded blue, little embroidered daisies. I tied the strings behind my back, and something inside me settled, like a chair pulled back to the right spot. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stirred. Purpose doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through cinnamon and soft batter. I greased the pans and poured the mixture slowly, evenly. The oven creaked as it warmed, and the scent began to rise. Sweet, forgiving, familiar. And just like that, the kitchen wasn't empty anymore. The community center smelled like peanut butter and baby wipes. Laughter spilled through the door as I stepped in, but so did doubt, the quiet kind, hanging behind their smiles. They were young, so young. Their babies dropped on their shoulders like little anchors. Some of them hadn't brushed their hair. Some hadn't slept. I knew the look. I took my seat and waited, not for permission, just for space to open. Then I spoke. How to soothe colic. Try the dryer. Run it and lay the baby near it. Works better than magic. A girl laughed through her tears. Another leaned in. One wrote it down. I told them how to stretch a meal, how to forgive themselves when the dishes piled up and the patience ran short, and they listened. They really listened. It wasn't a pity. It wasn't praise. It was a presence. And for the first time in a long time, my voice felt useful again. Every Wednesday, I take my seat in the corner of the library, the chair by the sunny window, the one that knows my shape. The kids gather around my knees, wide-eyed and wiggling, their hands sticky with excitement. I wait until they settle, just enough. Then I begin. Once upon a time. And just like that, their eyes go wide, mouths open, and the room gets quiet in the best kind of way. As I read, I feel something open in me. Not loudly, not all at once. Just a soft unfolding, like pages turning. I used to think I was fading. Like a photo left in the sun. Turns out I just needed a new frame, a new audience. The librarian watches from the desk, smiling, and when I close the book and the kids clap, little hands, loud with joy, I don't feel old, I feel held. Emily still comes every Saturday at 2. Doesn't matter if it's raining, if her hair's a mess, if she forgot her umbrella. She knocks, I open the door, and we go straight to the kitchen. She brings her sketchbook. I bring the cookies. We sit at the table and trade stories, hers drawn in smudged pencil, mine told in steam rising from our teacups. Sometimes she talks. Sometimes she just listens. Sometimes she hugs me on her way out, quick but tight. Like she means it. She doesn't know what she's saving me from, but she's doing it anyway. I used to think family was something you were born into, something printed in a photo album or stitched into your name. But now I know better. Family is who remembers your stories, who shows up, who doesn't need a holiday or a reason to stay. I spent too long mourning the ones who left me behind. Now I treasure the ones who found me here. The wind chime sways gently by the window. The clock ticks its steady rhythm, and on my fridge, taped crooked with pink washi tape, is a photo of me and Emily, both of us laughing at something I don't even remember. That's family, too. Each night before bed, I flick on the porch light. Not because I'm expecting anyone, just because it feels right, a soft glow, steady and sure. In case someone is looking for kindness, for warmth, for home. I leave it on because someone once left there's one for me, and I never forgot how that felt. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. It helps, just to be heard. If you're 50 or older, tell me your age and where you're watching from. I'd love to know who's out there, walking this road with me. And if you'd like more tales from this old heart of mine, subscribe for more of Grandma's stories. I'll be right here with the porch light on.